Who is Kotzebue's first true love? The answer can be found in a document that is hid, for years more or less, in plain sight. It is a memoir entitled Mein Umgang mit dem schönen Geschlecht, which Kotzebue wrote in 1817 and which I recently transcribed. There, Kotzebue tells the tale of his relationship with the woman he described as his first true love, Sophie von Bauer, whom he came to call die Generalin.
Sophie von Bauer was the wife of General Friedrich Wilhelm von Bauer, a military commander, engineer, and confidant of Catherine II, who in 1781 hired Kotzebue to be his private secretary. Bauer took such a liking to Kotzebue that he allowed him to live in his large house on the Palace Embankment in St. Petersburg. It was in this way that Kotzebue came to know Sophie. In his memoir, Kotzebue describes Sophie as very pretty, singling out her radiant blue eyes, silken hair, and lovely lips, but noting also that her nose was perhaps a bit too long for her face. What truly set Sophie apart was her grace, temperament, and education. It was she who taught Kotzebue to speak proper French and who introduced him to the great works of French literature, which they read aloud to each other. Sophie had come to Russia from Germany as a young girl with her mother and stepfather. When her mother died a few years later, her stepfather, who was General Bauer, asked Sophie to marry him. Sophie was horrified by this idea and raised various objections, but none of them dissuaded Bauer. Eventually, she agreed to marry him. The ensuing marriage was not unhappy, according to Kotzebue, and it produced 3 children. Still, Sophie could never feel anything more than esteem for Bauer. With Kotzebue, things were different, and over the course of several months, the two fell in love. Although they kept it secret from Bauer, this was a chaste love. Even kissing was off limits. And things might have remained this way if Bauer had not become gravely ill. He would die after a long struggle on February 15th, 1783. At this point, the path would have seemed clear for Sophie and August to be together, and so they were, within limits. The problem was that they could not be seen together in public without risking a scandal, and they could not marry without Sophie sacrificing her rank and status. Further complicating matters, Catherine had appointed Kotzebue to a position in Rafal, rather than St. Petersburg as he had hoped. Still, when Kotzebue departed for Estonia in November 1783, the lovers harbored romantic hopes that they would eventually be together. 3 months later, however, Sophie came down with a serious illness for which her doctors prescribed an extended stay at Bad Pyrmont. Kotzebue agreed to accompany her on her journey as far as the outskirts of Riga. But as the moment of separation drew near, Kotzebue became agitated by the thought that Sophie might not remain true to him. This made Sophie so despondent that she offered to marry Kotzebue right away. But Kotzebue rejected this idea. Instead, they agreed to wait until Sophie was cured before marrying and settling down. August and Sophie would not see each other again until the spring of 1785. In Mein Umgang, Kotzebue describes traveling to Hanover, where Sophie was staying, on wings of love, only to learn on his arrival that a French baron had fallen in love with her. Sophie tries to assure Kotzebue that her feelings for him are unchanged, but Kotzebue replies bitterly that he has met a young woman in Rafal who has sparked his interest. Although they try to put this incident behind them, their trust has been broken. They would never see each other again. Kotzebue would go on to marry the young woman from Rafal, and Sophie would marry her French baron. Still, years later, Kotzebue could look back in gratitude on his first true love, to which he owed, quote, "the sweetest joys of my youth, the education of my mind and heart." That is all very nice, but what Kotzebue writes about his breakup with Sophie doesn't square with the facts. For we know that when Kotzebue traveled to Hanover in the spring of 1785, he had just married Friederike von Essen and was, or was about to become, father to an infant son. So what was the real story? My best guess is that once Kotzebue got to Rafal, his promises to Sophie were not enough to keep him from pursuing a relationship with Friederike. and that once she became pregnant in the fall of 1784, the die was cast. That would mean that Kotzebue's visit to Sophie would have been very different from how it is described in Mein Umgang. Of course, the missing voice in all of this is Sophie's, but if we cannot hear her, except indirectly, then we can see her in this portrait that was painted by Angelika Kaufmann. In this way, I will give die Generalin, if not the last word, then the last look. Perhaps she is sending greetings to our Kotzebue picnic. Or perhaps not.